Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Mark Raven. Our guest today is Chad Bareither. He is the founder and principal consultant of Bareither Group Consulting. He brings a wealth of experience as a change agent in the corporate world. He's worked with organizations that include several Fortune 500 companies, also worked with the U.S. Army on process improvement. Chad is now the author of a new book. It's called, got a copy here, Improve Less: The Focus and Aligned Framework for Sustainable Continuous Improvement. So Chad holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Michigan Tech University. I know Chad a little bit through Michigan Lean Consortium events, and I'm from Michigan. So I'm going to get all casual and just call it Michigan Tech. Is that okay,
Yeah,
Chad?
sounds great.
Chad is a certified Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt, and he has master's degrees in both industrial and systems engineering and applied statistics from Rutgers University. So, Chad, congratulations on the book. That's going to be a lot of what we talk about today, and the story of the book and topics within. But big accomplishment. So, congratulations.
Oh, thank you very much.
I think it was like two years ago, last year, I guess, at the MLC conference, and you shared with me that you were working on the book at that point. Am I remembering right?
You are remembering correctly. And then just in my my freshman endeavor here, that the journey between words on a page and published work was something I'd never been through. So that was a great experience. A lot of learnings there.
Yeah. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about the process of writing. We have probably people listening who might be interested in doing a book of their own, and we'll certainly kind of talk about the content within there around continuous improvement. But Chad, I always like to hear people's origin story. Kind of tell us the Chad Bareither story of how, when, where, why you got involved in continuous improvement.
Yeah, so try not to make it too long, but I was working on I studied mechanical engineering, was working on an internship that was with Caterpillar, large equipment manufacturer, and doing design work. And my favorite part of the whole summer was actually taking design revisions down to the manufacturing floor to speak with manufacturing or industrial engineers, manufacturing engineers, depending upon their title, about the feasibility of making some of these changes. And I'd get enamored down there watching. They had automated guided vehicles, and they were running production, heavy equipment. I'm like looking around like, this is way more fun than walking around on the carpets upstairs. And so I went back to school. I said, I don't think I want to be a mechanical engineer. I studied industrial engineering, and the aspect that really caught my attention was things like quality and reliability. So coming out of that studies, I worked for the Army, which you mentioned, as a civilian engineer, doing development of different systems that then we would oftentimes have produced by a government contractor. We would own the tech data, and either a government facility or a contractor facility would do that. So process improvement became a pretty big deal. And at the time, they were pioneering a new program, new to them at least, called Lean Six Sigma. And I was able to be on one of the inaugural classes, the Greenbelt classes. Mm-hmm. And I loved it. It was a lot of things I learned, put together in a pretty neat package, and then was able to leverage that skill set with a lot of suppliers, right? So work out, and rather just show up and do the sampling inspection and pass or fail, was like, well, let's talk about your processes, why we think we failed, work on improvement. And that was great. I feel very blessed that I found kind of my niche early on of partnering logical thinking with engaging and teaching people and statistics and kind of smashing all that together. After I transitioned from that career with the intent really to relocate back to the Midwest, was involved with an organization, a medical device manufacturer that was much more on the lean side of that. Mm-hmm. And that was great, right? So that wasn't it was kind of mentioned in that Lean Six Sigma program, but now actually seeing working through things like frontline problem solving and the mentality of Kaizen and talking about material replenishment, that was fantastic. I'm like, man, now partnering kind of the heavy analytics with some of the logic and the people skills of that, I just continue to grow, add things to my tool set. There was 2 other career stops there and basically leading up to what I do now in the book was I've seen in some large organizations and some smaller suppliers, like what I feel works and doesn't work from my own experience. And I'm saying I think we can simplify the approach down, and we don't need, volumes of text to get the concept across, and just each organization is going to evolve their own form, right? We can't copy and paste whatever you want to say. You can't copy and paste
Yeah.
Six Sigma from Motorola. You can't copy and paste TPS from Toyota. You have your own corporate culture and you have your own corporate objectives. And so I said, well, what are some of the foundational elements? We need to deploy strategy. We need to improve processes. We need to manage the business every day.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty universal. So I just added up kind of the minimum tool set, and that's still how I engage clients now.
Yeah.
Saying, what's the minimum we need to get started? And then we'll add things on as the need arises. We identify a problem. There's a different strategic objective.
Yeah. So we'll come back. I want to talk about your shift into consulting and what you've learned in different settings that led to the book. Just kind of going back to some of the story that you told there. I mean, I think it's interesting how we can often end up starting down one path, and at least you learned early on. I mean, we're not doing an episode of My Favorite Mistake here, and I don't know if that was your favorite mistake doing that Emmy internship, but I mean, it's good that you listened to your gut, or what your heart was telling you about where your interests were, and making that pivot relatively early on. I'm glad you were able to do that. Some people kind of get stuck and say, well, here's my path. I'm going to keep going down that path. But and any other kind of thoughts or, about, if there's somebody listening who's trying to figure out, early career path. Because, it took me a little while. I started off, at one point, I was a material science engineer. Yeah. And there was a summer internship. And I'm like, I don't care about life through a microscope. Even if it's a cool electron microscope. So I made my pivot. I don't know, just other thoughts around just kind of trying to figure out that career direction.
Yeah, it's really, what do you want to do? So when you envision like your work day, your work week, I was just like going from computer screen to like punching a time card. I was just like, man, this also partners in. So I had that internship. I went back to school at Michigan Tech, and if you want to be even more casual, when you're in Michigan, it's just tech. So I went back to tech, and one of the professors I had, Craig Fredericks, taught a class on design for manufacturing, right? And I had this quote written down for years. I even carried it around on like a Post-it note, right? Which was the best design in the world isn't worth anything if you haven't thought about how to produce it, right? He showed a couple of examples of senior design projects that had component parts that were not producible, like great design. The technology doesn't exist to make that part the way you've designed it.
Yeah.
And that really just got me thinking. I'm like, yeah, I mean, design doesn't matter and the other thing is you don't need to make one typically. You need to make 10 or 10,000. And so thinking a lot more about production and satisfying the customer more than just the design element of it just really resonated with me. So yeah, maybe that sounds a little cheesy, listen to your gut, but I mean, I guess pay attention to what lights you up and what you get interested in. I was fortunate enough. I also really like teaching. I like teaching because I like learning, which is a weird way to put that in, but like learner is my number one Gallup Strength Finder strength, is like, I love learning new things. And so new skill sets. So teaching others, seeing that light bulb moment for someone else, when you give them a really simple data analysis tool to display their data or look at a process, and like suddenly they look at the process they may have been doing for 10 years through a different lens and they just get it, like that is what is fulfilling for me. So I saw that more of engaging with production than like trying to, iterate to the next optimal design in a finite element analysis. So
right. No, but you're right. Teaching is a great way to deepen your understanding of a field, right? Writing a book, I think is kind of, a similar thing. Again, Chad's book is Improve Less. So before we come back to dig a little bit deeper into the book, I'm curious your experience in that civilian role with the Army. Do I hear you right that you were working with contractors, suppliers, manufacturers that were producing goods for the Army? And then there were
Yeah.
maybe other people working on Army processes?
So a little bit of both, right? So I started out my career there in the quality engineering department, which was working with government contractors. Some were government owned facilities. If we want to get like really like hip to the lingo, they were, so you'd have a government owned, government operated facility, a GOCO, government owned, contractor operated, or strict government contractor. It didn't matter. The product you were producing had a specification that it had to meet. And the specification in there is a military standard. It's abbreviated MIL-STD, so MIL Standard 1916 is the DoD's preferred methods for acceptance of product. The first half of that document talks about process control and variation. And then the second half talks about, if you don't have process control, here's sampling tables you can reference. 98% of the contracts I was supporting were just like, we would fly in, we would do the sampling, pass or fail. And I'm like, has anyone read the rest of this document?
Yeah.
Like, why are we not focusing more on process control than end of line inspection? Like, there's a lot of things that could be failing. If we could find that out upstream, we'd be wasting less money. We could get these contracts at lower cost, blah, blah, blah. So I actually took ownership of that for a few years. I was the custodian of MIL Standard 1916, and I've traveled even internationally to suppliers to help coach them through like implementation of process control rather than just sampling plans.
Yeah.
And so that was amazing, right? And then kind of pivot that into a reliability engineering role, looking more upfront on product design and capabilities. And then was trained and certified as a black belt eventually, and joined, it was called the Lean Six Sigma Competency Office, but we were doing training and deployment across our directorate.
Yeah. Yeah. When you think of all the benefits that come from Lean and how that would apply to the military, first off, you think of the safety and the quality of what's being provided, thinking about making delivery, being cost effective. That space doesn't have a glowing reputation for cost control and cost effectiveness. So I mean, there's so many arguments, it seems, for the Army and the DoD to be encouraging, if not requiring, suppliers. The way Toyota and automakers, it's pretty much the default nowadays. But there's that question of, well, okay, if you require it, are they going through the motions, or are they putting methods into place like you write about in Improve Less, right? Kind of superficial lean versus, oh, we're actually committed to this.
Yeah. So it's a great question. And it's just an example that popped in my head was things like using statistical process control. It's like they produced a lot and then they go back and they chart the data. And I'm like, but you computed the control limits based upon the lot you just produced. I hope it's in control. So yeah. Rather than, forward looking for that. So yeah, I totally get it. There's some going through the motions if you make it a contract requirement.
And not just checking the box and getting Chad off your back. No. But hopefully that was all a cooperative relationship of the Army helping those contractors help the Army. Like, hopefully those were good collaborative relationships. I think like you would tend to see in a lean supply chain, or at least that's the direction that you'd want to see it going in.
The direction we were going. I wouldn't say 100% ended up that way. Yeah.
Yeah. But so then working in that type of setting, it's something that comes up a lot, whether it's anything non-automotive. This happens a lot in healthcare. This probably happens in other manufacturing sectors where, you're teaching this and people may hit you with some variation of like the statement of like, well, yeah, but we don't build cars. Like, you spend a lot of time helping people see, well, look, as you write about, this is a transferable framework. Like, the word car probably doesn't appear in your book. I don't have a digital copy to go and search. Right? This isn't. How do you help people see that this is something that really can apply to any type of business?
Yeah. So my thinking, both from my education as well as my experience, is inherently process based. So whatever it is they're producing, you ultimately serve a customer or client. right? We're fulfilling a need, whether that's a service delivery or a product delivery to a customer or client. So, okay, who's that client? That's usually pretty easy to answer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and what service or product do you provide to them? And this is it. And what's the process that you produce that? So, I mean, that could be a financial report. That's things I've looked at before. I worked in utility industry for a while. One of the reports they do is a load study, which is looking at electric distribution loads. So what's the consumption of our product profile distributed between industrial, commercial, residential, all these other things.
Yeah.
So there's a report that needs to be produced. So there's a process that you follow. And do you know how long it takes? And how often do you make a mistake and have to go back? And what did your customers actually need in the end? And in that particular example, we found out that we were able to shorten a 20-page report into a 2-worksheet Excel table and just email them the Excel table. That's all the information they need. No one's reading the report. Not because they don't want the information, because to make the decision, that's what they need. So there's a report. I just had lunch yesterday with a client I haven't been engaged with for a while, but they're health and human services. So they do foster care and adoption and counseling services. They have a pretty mature lean management system in place where they're actually looking at a top level for the organization, how are we on track to strategy, how are our programs performing, then in a program and portfolio review, they call that like a tier 2 huddle, then a tier 1 huddle where they're looking at individual program performance and things like that. So like they get it now. The areas that it's been deployed in is it does work. There is an underlying process, and you don't have to convince them like we're not manufacturing, we're not automotive. If we just step back and say, are we following a process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you've worked for manufacturers. You mentioned Consumers Energy. Were you there when Patty Poppy was?
I was, yeah.
CEO?
Yeah, she was CEO when I was hired in.
And she's now CEO of PG&E in California. I was not real familiar with her until September. She was one of the speakers at a GE event that they organized and produced called the Lean Mindset. So like Patty really impressed me. And I know some others from Michigan who knew Patty, an industrial engineer by background. Yeah. And I really impressed with her leadership and commitment to lean. And there's a video available on YouTube. I'll put a link to that in the show notes, or Chad, I'll send it to you if I haven't seen it. But like she was really emphasizing using A3 problem solving to address the biggest problems they were dealing with, which was basically setting fires in California. Mm-hmm. So like, she emphasized, to use your words, they weren't trying to copy and paste from any other organization, and they weren't just training people on, well, here's this A3 process that you could use someday. Like she really zeroed in on like, this is how we're going to learn and practice. And they've had a huge reduction in incidents and fires and damage and harm, really kind of putting safety first. So anyway, sorry to tell a little mini speech about Patty Poppy, but I should turn it into a question.
She's a great leader, and she really understands the people side of it as well, of continuous improvement, engaging the people and empowering them. And you talked about problem solving. So the problem solving methodology, whatever goes on that A3 size sheet of paper, right? Mm-hmm. Whether you have 5 phases or 8 steps or PDCA,
or DMAIC, as you write.
Or DMAIC. Well, I am a little bit partial to DMAIC. That's where I cut my teeth. So,
and I'm not here for an argument about that. It's fine.
You can always get out your lean decoder ring, right? How many slides have you seen where it's like, well, these are the phases of DMAIC, and it maps to these 8 steps, and this is the 8D, and that's the PDCA, and it's like, whatever works. My purpose of bringing all that up is just like we talk about, you have a process for producing a service or a product, having a consistent process for solving your problems, just make sure that you get more consistent results, right? You can't rely on the lone few just inherently brilliant problem solvers. Is like, let's teach, and this is the big thing that Patty was about, and some of the organizations that are more mature, about building an army of problem solvers, where that's just the way we think. Well, if I want to think that way, I have to build the muscle memory. I have to go through it a few times, and it's going to feel, I don't know, maybe even burdensome or overwhelming and like unnatural the first couple times, like trying to write your name with your left hand or something. But But that's the way we build the muscle memory, and that's the way you get broader engagements to where it's not, the lone consultant or master black belt or whoever parachuting in to solve the problem for people.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to also talk a little bit, Chad, about your transition to being a consultant and what you've learned, about being an outsider to an organization versus being an employee directly on the inside.
Mm-hmm. So the transition kind of happened gradually, and then kind of ramped up it a little sooner than I expected. So it was like a friend of a friend would ask for some help, like, well, I know Chad's good at this. So in this case, it was problem solving. Could you come in and help our team solve this problem? Yeah, sure. Then the same client maybe, could you teach a class on that? Teach some more people to do that? Yeah, sure. Could you coach them through so it's like we see the ratcheting up of expectations here. Then eventually it's like, well, I was challenging them, well, we're kind of scattershot problem solving. Like, what's the strategy we're trying to accomplish, right? And you get a little bit of the glazed work look of like, well, we have an X matrix somewhere, right? And it's like, well, let's talk about your strategic planning process and what are we trying to accomplish? It's like, could you help us with all of that? And it was like, okay, here's a proposal that I thought they'd surely say no to, and they said yes. And then at the same time I was onboarding another client, I'm like, man, I can't keep up with the day job. So that was like, it was great. It was, I think there are a lot of validation of a skill set that I could deliver as an internal change agent, as you mentioned. The difference there's pros and cons, right, to the difference. As an internal change agent, the nice thing is you're already, if I'm being a little cynical, you're already a sunk cost, so people aren't scared to ask your opinion, right? Mm-hmm. But there is a little bit of that effect of, like a prophet isn't recognized in their hometown, where they feel like you don't have a separate enough perspective to help them solve the problem. And that's something that is valuable being an outside resource, is that you do bring a different perspective, but often they're more willing to listen, to say, well, you've seen a bunch of different operations in this industry, across industry. So maybe you have seen something that's significant that we could learn from. The challenge, though, is getting some of the commitment or the buy-in, right? Of like upfront that I can solve your problem.
Yeah.
Or I should rephrase that. I can help you solve your problem rather than me solve your problem. I did kind of stepped on my own words there.
Well, but I mean, there's that difference between, there's this question of expectations, right? Is the client wanting you to teach everybody how to fish, or are they looking for you to come with a boat full of fish for them?
Yeah, I think it depends on your consulting model. I mean, both types of, because we're using a very broad term when we say consultant. I've been more moving towards, when people ask me what I do, I said I'm a process improvement professional. And they say, I kind of understand those three words. Tell me more what that means.
Right.
When you say a consultant, they expect you to be, I fly in on Monday, I fly out on Thursday, and I wear a suit. And it's like, well, no, I help you lay out the strategy, but I also help implement. Right. And I think that's the value and really I've had a good fortune of working at different levels in an organization where I do the shop floor problem solving, if you will, and implementation and Kaizen events. But I've also been in the C-suite room talking about strategy. So I can work across that. So the organizations I really like to work with are kind of medium sized, where I can have that span of impact. Mm-hmm. You get too big and it's like, that's a big group in the C-suite, and that's a monstrous group on the front line, and you just can't possibly span all of that.
Yeah, and I think it's just being consultant to consultant. You try to find fit with organizations that you like working with, organizations that are going to like working with you, and there are some people who don't have the patience or the interest in, well, I'm going to teach your people, I'm going to coach your people how to improve. Like, there are some people that want to hire the problem solver with the answer, and like there's a lot of people who could do that, and there's a time and a place for that, I would say. But it comes back to questions of like, what's more sustainable. Mm-hmm. And I think we're on the same page of realizing it's more sustainable when it's not some outside person lobbing a solution in and then leaving, no matter how good that solution is.
Yeah. And I mean, so that word shows up in the subtitle of my book, right? Sustainable continuous improvement, which is
Yeah.
building a system around it. If we just, that's your point, like lob a solution at the problem or even teach someone to put the solution at the problem. Now we have like one isolated solution that is operating in a fundamentally different like paradigm management structure than the rest of the organization, right? It can't thrive in that. Like what's the infrastructure that we put around that to change leadership's behavior? So I've had this conversation a couple of times over the last month. So once you make a process change, like whose accountability is it to make sure that process sticks?
Hmm.
I agree with the fact that you say we want to empower people to solve their own problems, but like the accountability has to go to leadership. So who's going to reinforce the standard that you wrote? I was
Right.
engaged with a client, just begun an engagement with a client, and the front line will tell you like we don't train to our standard work, we don't audit to our standard work, and I'm like, so why do we have standard work? Because leadership told us we had to have standard work. So
Right.
that's great, and I can help you write quote unquote better standard work, but that's not going to thrive without leadership saying, yes, that is how this process is going to be conducted. That's how we're going to train and onboard. That's what we're going to audit to. And if it's wrong, we'll continue to update it. It should be living. But just saying, the problem is that we have too much variability. We're going to write standard work. It's like, okay, and then what?
Hmm. Yeah. And so then it's things. It's not just process improvement, but it's daily management, as you touch on two of the three pillars of the book. And again, we're joined by Chad Bareither. The book is Improve Less: The Focus and Align Framework for Sustainable Continuous Improvement. Before we dig into more of the content of the book, like tell us a little bit more about the spark. Why write a book? Why write this book? Not challenging that you should have, but I just always like to hear an author's perspective of like, what was the moment where you're like, yeah, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna take this.
Yeah. Um, so it went through some evolution, right? So it started out with just looking at a few client engagements and saying, I seem to be doing something different for each client. And what I noticed is three distinct clients that I look back on now is like one really wanted help with strategic planning and strategic deployment, but that was it. And I'm like, great, but then like, how are you going to change your processes to to get different results? If you're saying you want better performance, however you're going to measure that,
Right.
your processes need to change and evolve to get you better results. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, we need the rest of the equation. I had another client that was just looking at, training and certification around problem solving. It's like, great, but like, are we strategically aligned? And like, who's going to manage those changes afterwards? And another client that was looking just to talk about implementing, huddle meetings, which is, I don't know, maybe they saw it at a conference or something. So great, but what metrics go on your daily huddle and what do you do if it's off track? Like who's going to do the problem solving? So I'm like, I was engaging at these three different areas. And I said, if I had to start over with those clients, where would I start? And
Mm-hmm.
so I started just mapping it out, like whiteboarding it, pencil and paper, like what would my structure be? The past organizations that I've worked with, the common elements of their lean management systems, like what was in there. And I say, all right, if I had to start off, we need to engage with leadership and understanding, first of all, why
Mm-hmm.
we're even doing this. Like, why do you want lean? And or continuous improvement. We'll more generalize it.
Yeah.
And if that is something like cost reduction, okay, fine, and maybe that's valid, but cost reduction for what? And if it is, fine, then that means the management system is going to be structured around that. Then we set strategy, improve the processes, and then stabilize the processes with daily management. So I started mapping that out, and I said, oh, this is good. I like the way this is flowing. I
Mm-hmm.
should write this up into a white paper or something like that and make it marketing collateral so I can share with
Right.
my clients. Here's how I would engage with you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote all of that down. I was meeting with a business coach and I kind of shared some of what I was working on. He said, send me a copy. And he says, this is a book. And I said, like a book? I'm like, it's not long enough to be a book. And he's like, that doesn't matter. Like, we started throwing around titles and the concept that I have. And I just, we're trying to improve too much. We should be doing less. And we got to that. And he's like, now the book makes sense. I'm like, it is a skinny book, right? Cover to cover, I think it's 138 pages.
Yeah.
So,
My,
but
my
it's
book
really
coach
about,
my book coach would tell you you're spot on with doing a small book, a skinny book, if you will, because it's not overwhelming. Someone can quote unquote read it on a flight. You've probably heard that already, right?
I did. Originally the back cover was read it in a weekend and implement on Monday. And
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know. I want people to feel like they have to read on the weekends, but but you can digest it really in a few hours. And
Right.
then there is a structured process in chapter 5 to say, okay, where do I start?
Yeah.
And it's not tool heavy by design, because I said we'll introduce the tools when we figure out what problem we're trying to solve. Right? It
Exactly.
outlines a
Yeah.
high level framework that's been very successful for the clients I work with. Do I bring in more? Yes, but
Yeah.
that is a great place to start. So that's kind of the evolution of how I got there. Then it ended up with, words on a page. Business coach says you should turn this into a book, and I'm like, great, I have no idea how to do that. So then I work with a publishing strategist. I decided to self-publish, and then that process was all foreign to me as well. So we need content editing, we need copy editing, we need layout, we need illustration, and I'm like, great, just tell me what you need me to do.
Well, you got good help. You can see, and that's where I think like self-publishing is a bit of a misnomer. You didn't do it all yourself. I didn't do
No.
books all by myself. So it's like I like to say my company. I am the publisher. My company is the publisher. But yeah, it's a team effort. So
And you were asking at the top of the interview a little bit about people who are interested in writing, and here's something interesting. I did definitely share with a small group of people, professionals that I trusted their opinion, that would at least understand the subject matter so they could challenge me on content, right? I'm just on the periphery right now of a group that's going through it as like a book club, and they're all continuous improvement professionals, right? So there's some agreement and there's some tearing it to shreds based upon your background. And it's fun. It's valuable input for me to hear about, okay, like, do I agree with that input or not? Tying back to writing a book, it's too bad that it's very waterfall in its approach to get to the customer, right? Mm-hmm. And if I had to do it again, and if and when I do another book, I would advise people to get eyes on the content, right, before you get too far down the road where it's difficult to change, right? Once you've been through copy editing, if you change anything, you got to go back to copy editing. So, and I think a lesson I had learned, maybe a mistake, Mark, is like I had professionals read it. I should have had, when it was in manuscript form, more of my target audience read it, right? So luckily, it is resonating with them very well. But as I look back, I'm like, more of an agile deployment of like, here's the outline, here's the mind map, here's the introductory chapter. What do you think, right? I felt like once I had sunk so much effort into it, right, then it's difficult to pivot, or else you're restructuring the whole book. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And you get another crack at a different book. You're right. Agile or lean startup ideas, I think, apply really well to a book. There's a whole methodology out there called lean publishing, where you can apply some of those ideas to have it be more iterative. And I think there's what the experts might tell you about the content, but then having readers who don't know anything about process improvement doesn't make sense to them. Like who are you writing it for, and getting some of that feedback early and often.
Yeah. There's like phases of any client's journey, right? Where you're kind of upfront and you're just problem unaware, right? Not even aware that the way I'm running my business, that there's challenges with it. And then eventually you have some different perspective, insight, some learning, that you become problem unaware, but problem aware, solution unaware. Or then eventually like, I'm problem aware and solution aware, but I'm not implementing, right? And then problem eventually goes away.
Right. Or I'm trying to implement and it's not going well. So then you maybe need coaching or help.
Yeah.
That, right. Are we not doing the right thing, or are we not doing the thing well? Right.
Yeah. Well, that's an excellent point as well. Yeah. But if I'm trying to write, and I was, trying to write people that are kind of on those first two of like, I'm either problem unaware or I'm problem aware but solution unaware. It's a different audience than saying like, yeah, we've tried lean and it didn't work, or something to that effect. I'm like, if continuous improvement isn't in your lexicon right now, like where would you start?
Yeah. So one thing in the book, and you say this early on, and I think this is a great call to action: change fewer things, but the right things. So there's a problem statement or current state in a lot of organizations of people, leaders are trying to do too many things, too many projects, too busy. Like how would you describe that problem statement and some of the causes of why
Hmm.
that is so common?
So I think you described the problem statement very well, but the problem that it creates uh, is lack of focus and a lack of alignment. So if I don't know what to focus on, I'll give you an example from a past organization I worked with, and they had 26 strategic goals. So it's like, great, that's 26. One, I probably can't even list them all if I work in the organization. So that's the first problem. Secondly, it's Tuesday afternoon and I say, what's the most important thing to be working on? It's like, maybe it's one of the 26,
Mm-hmm.
maybe.
Or
Um,
fire has popped up, right?
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So if I have a limited amount of space, time in my calendar, wouldn't it be great if the whole team was rowing together? And maybe that sounds a little cliche, but like if we can align more on a few, and I'll even challenge one to three strategic objectives like that we're really trying to accomplish as a business, and we mobilize more of the efforts towards that, then we'll actually make more headway. We'll make more progress. So um, that's the thinking I'm doing all the way down to the front line of like, don't fix everything, like fix one thing. What's bothering you today? Let's work
Mhm.
on fixing that, rather than like, why should we have 20 open A3s versus two closed? Like
Mhm.
it's always been a challenge to me of saying like, we have to have more improvement ideas. There's no shortage of ideas. Like, let's
Right,
finish one
right.
and then we can talk about another one. Um, there's a couple things I see as a root cause. So one is everyone feels like they need to contribute. So it's like, well, I'm not involved in that strategic initiative somehow, whatever. So I'm going to have my own. Okay. So they feel like I have to have something to work on. Um, if you think about something like theory of constraints, is like, but that might not benefit the organization at all for you to be changing and improving right now. And if every organization has a finite capacity for changing more stuff just takes away from the overall capacity. Different organization I work with, the director was a friend of mine and was lamenting them to me one day. He's like, Chad, I get a call like every week if I just need one person for this initiative. It's like, yeah, but that's the 10th call I've had. Like, I don't have 10 people to loan out for a strategic initiative. I got to run the business. So that's one thing is folks feel like I have to have something, right? The other thing is our planning cycles. Is I feel like if it's a year plan, I need to load it up to make sure that there's enough to get done. Well, maybe strategic planning shouldn't be year to year. I still advocate for an annual review, look back of what we've accomplished, and then look forward. But prioritize. If you pick 1 to 3 and you're like, it's not enough, I'm like, great, get those done, and then we'll pick another three.
Right.
But like, what's the sense in starting 6 and maybe finishing 2 by the end of the year?
Right.
I'm trying to remember the name of the organization. I was at the Lean Solutions Conference here in Muskegon, and they had a beautiful chart which I'm totally going to steal, and it was empirically sound, and it talked about the number of goals that an organization has and the number of goals that they accomplish. And guess what? As the goals go up, the number that you actually accomplish goes down,
Mm-hmm.
which is completely logical from my point of view. But we see this hedging of bets of let's put more goals on, and every function needs one. And then what we actually experience is there's no manageable change. And then, sorry to make this a long answer, the last thing
Right.
I'd put on that is we're not thinking about sustainment. So we might think about how many people would it take to run this project? Great. When the project's over, there is some investment by that process owner, the leadership involved, to actually sustain that change. And the hardest part is going to be in its infancy when we're actually asking people to do their job differently, measure their job differently, et cetera. So we don't think about the effort. So those are kind of the 3 root causes that I experience. Like everyone feels like they need something, that we have these long planning cycles, so we're just going to fill it up
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that we don't run out of stuff.
Yeah.
And the third thing is we don't plan the resources for sustainment after the change is made.
Yeah. Hey, don't apologize for giving an in-depth answer. I don't need to ask all the questions. Maybe I can ask less. And
Yeah.
Hopefully I'm prioritizing and choosing a good mix of questions for everyone. But when we look at this framework, Chad, the three pieces: strategy, deployment, process improvement, daily management. One thing you touch on in the book, I was going to ask you about is, a gap between how senior leaders are spending their time versus maybe how they should, a different mix of spending their time that might be effective. I wanted to say that in a less judgmental way.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a worksheet that I have that I've evolved that when I'm coaching individual leaders, we will look through, which is a reflection on your calendar.
Yeah.
And I would say, before we go into that specific tool, like reflection in general in business is, I think, underutilized. Like taking a step back after a project, after a financial quarter, and really reflecting on like how we did, how our processes are performing. But I don't see. And I force, is that right? The right word to do? I ask politely the
You
leaders I'm
strongly
coaching,
encourage.
strongly encourage to do this of let's look at your actual calendar and where you spent your time and then categorize it. Like, are you spending your time putting out daily fires? Are you spending any time on process improvement? Did you spend any time on a regular basis on strategy? So that we talked earlier, like annual planning cycle. So if we really do all of our strategic thinking at a 4-hour workshop before we play golf in November, is it surprising to us that folks in the organization don't know what the strategy is or what they should be working on? Mm-hmm. Yes, I advocate literally on a daily basis, we should be talking about strategy, progress is strategy, and what our key initiatives are. It's leadership's job is to clear communication on that. So we look back at the calendar and just say, where are we spending our time? Are you working on the right things? Now, that only is the starting point for a problem, right? A problem is a gap between what I want to have happen or what I expect to have happen and what actually happened. So then if we find a gap, then we can say, great, what do we think we should do about that? There's not one answer to that question, but man, some reflection on that and reflection on problem solving, what went well and what didn't go well, reflection on a product launch. So reflection in general is, I think, underutilized in industry.
Yeah, because that doesn't feel or look like work. Thinking, right? But it's so important. But I think people discount that because it doesn't seem as somehow like going to a meeting and sitting there seems more action oriented than sitting and thinking and reflecting.
Yeah.
But which is,
I feel like we could do a whole other podcast on meetings and the values of meetings and attendance of meetings. But but we do in our traditional, I'm speaking from a very Western mindset, right? Find value in going to meetings and having my calendar fill.
Yeah. Yeah. That it's something people brag about how busy I'm triple booked. That means all sorts of things. And we probably could have done a good 45 minutes on each of the three components here. But let me ask you one other question, Chad, kind of related to daily management. Maybe it's related to all three of these things. When you write about a culture of learning, what are some things that you've learned that help leaders turn that goal into a reality, or at least working toward and developing a culture of learning?
So I don't know if I'm going to go in exactly the direction you're expecting, but one of the things they have to learn is one, they're not responsible for getting there. They're not the ones turning the screws or meeting with clients or delivering the products, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing is they don't even necessarily have to know how to get there, right? And so that's kind of crazy of saying we need to know where we're going, we need to know what we want to accomplish, and then I really need to empower the team to tell me can we get there, right? Is this, if you think about the catchball process, is this reasonable? And if once we've arrived at something that's reasonable to accomplish, how do we get there? Now, what that culture of learning creates now is the leader's learning about the process, because often if you've moved up in leadership, you've been separated from the work, from the actual assembly, from the actual service delivery for some years.
Yeah.
So your knowledge is already, I don't know, what do you want to say, rotting?
Yeah,
expiring.
and that happens in healthcare too. A nurse leader used to be a nurse, but that was very different 15, 20 years ago, or
Yeah. Yeah.
even just a few years ago. You're right. Things
So
change.
learning can be the leader needs to learn again about the process, not just assume they know the process because they did it at 1.5 years ago, or I spent 15 minutes on the line last month. So there's some learning of like I need to understand how we're going to get there, but empowering the team to do that, and then the learning of we talked early on about one of the best ways to learn is to teach. So then like teaching the problem solving process again, the process, not the answer. What this builds for the team now is giving them the chance to learn. So I've told you, Mark, as the leader, you've told me the goal. We've agreed on what we think we can accomplish and how we're going to get there. And now I get to learn, right? I get to learn how to accomplish that, and when I fall short of that goal, what I should do. And I learn about accountability too. Like if I'm owning this, it was my idea, right?
Mhm.
I want to make it work versus like I'm just doing what Mark told me to do.
Right.
So some of the biggest learnings we see in leadership is relearning about their process, but also learning how to delegate and coach,
Mhm.
which I think are terms that we say, and everyone's like they nod their head of like, yeah, I know what delegation means, yeah, I know what coaching means. It's like, but we're not widespread. We're not delegating and coaching, right? We're dictating answers to the organization.
Yeah. Well, Chad, congratulations again on the book, Improve Less. I wouldn't be surprised if there's another book that will come out of your work and reflection. Um, this is congratulations on getting this book out. So I will put links in the show notes to your website, Chad, and ways people can get more information about the book. So it's great to have that over the finish line. I'm sure that feels good to have it out there. Hopefully, the reviews I think when I looked are all 5 stars. Not to jinx it, because every author gets their first non 5-star review. Brace yourself for that. That's a different conversation. But so congrats. I'm sure it feels good.
Yeah, it does feel good. I'm thrilled that there's some initial positive sentiment towards it. It's bringing people value, which is like what I set out to do. So it's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up, Chad?
No, this has been an awesome conversation. I think I was telling you up front, a little geeked out, right? Is like Lean Blog, some other podcasts that I've been on are things that I've listened to for a while. I followed your work for a while, so I mean, this is it's a little bit surreal to be at operating it and communicating it at this level is just fantastic. So it's great.
Well, good. Well, it was great to have you here. Thank you for telling us about your story, things you've learned, things that you're sharing here in the book. So again, we've been joined Chad Bareither. The book is Improve Less, the Focus and Aligned Framework for Sustainable Continuous Improvement. Maybe we can do this again sometime, whether it's here or on My Favorite Mistake. There's so much more we can discuss. Look forward to whether that's next year at MLC or wherever we cross paths next, or here in the podcast.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.